I'm going to start with a clip that also has water in it. It's by Luisa Marilac, and it became viral all over Brazil with millions of hits in last year. Luisa Marilac was an unknown person. She was a sex worker, Brazilian sex worker in Spain, and made this video supposedly for as a kind of like slight to her ex-boyfriend. And then it just became viral, and she became really famous in Brazil and got invited to all these talk shows, and it turns out has had a tremendous effect on Brazilian culture. And the subtitles on both of my clips I added, so she didn't have subtitles on that was in Portuguese.
Eu decidi fazer algo de diferente. Decidi ficar na minha casa, na minha piscina, tomando meus bons drinks, curtindo esse verão maravilhoso da Europa, e dividindo com vocês esses momentos meus. Uma ocasião de ser que eu ainda estava na pior. Se você está na pior, porra, que quer dizer tá bem, né?
So two of Brazil's most recurrent platitudes about itself have always been that Brazil is the country of the future and that God is Brazilian. It would be of little surprise then that both fantasies, one of divine kinship, the other of deferred salvation, would merge so symbiotically when Brazil's fetishized potential seems to finally find opportunities for materialization. Today, after all, Brazil is able to make previously unimaginable claims about how close it is to that utopian dictum stitched across its flag, and until recently, a perverse reminder of the gap between the fantasy of the state and the state of the state. Order and progress is what the flag says. Examples of what we might deem progress, or Brazil experiencing its former promises of futurity today, are 20 million people pulled out of poverty in the Lula years from 2002 and 2010, the election of its first female and rumored lesbian president, Dilma Rousseff, in 2010, winning the rights to host the Olympics in 2016 and the World Cup in 2014, the approval of sex reassignment surgery to be paid for by the state in 2007, the occupation of the Rio de Janeiro favelas by the police and the army and the pacification units in 2010, the Lei da Palmada, or the law prohibiting parents from spanking their children in 2011, and the ruling by the Brazilian Supreme Court that same-sex couples are legally entitled to civil unions in 2011. The thread used as raw material to keep the dream of the nation alive in Brazil and elsewhere has often been, of course, the figure of the homosexual. Weaving heterosexuality away as negative homosexuality through painstaking quotidian iteration, the viado, or faggot, has served as yardstick for the construction of the normative Brazilian citizen as much as the concept of woman has functioned as necessary launching pad for the construction of the always already male subject. If the woman does not exist, as Lacan reminds us, does the homosexual stand a chance? If in the US, that which is not heterosexual has found at least a few categories to spread itself across in the letters LGBTQ and so on, Brazilians seem to play by rules similar to the ones that Tomás Almaguer lays out in Chicano Man, a cartography of homosexual identity and behavior. Any male who is gender nonconformant and allows himself to be penetrated loses their status as both heterosexual and male. any other man engaging in sexual relations with them and still obeying the laws of gender conformance is still considered heterosexual. That means, according to this logic, that feminine bottoms, and bottoms are always feminine here, are homosexual and really women, but masculine tops retain their heterosexuality, perhaps even enhance it, by exercising their phallic power on just about any object willing to take it. So this is just... and versatility cannot even be imagined. Here, gender difference is born out of a mix full of tautological assumptions involving social performativity and sexual role, activity versus passivity, which in many ways trumps difference in genitalia. In the Brazilian context, the homosexual, that is, the feminine bottom, is never a good enough woman. He's always a second-rate substitute for them, a botched woman who will do the trick right now, introducing a kind of hierarchy of womanhood. Some are ready-made, others become it through a combination of penetration and an extra sway of their hips. Of course, this schema is not without anxieties and something of an unspeakable secret that requires some labor from the part of the heterosexual Brazilian male to justify having sex with an approximation of woman rather than woman herself. The male-to-female transsexual, then, seems like the perfect bridging of the gap between the physical incompleteness of the faggot and the ready-madeness of the biological woman. The trans woman can be not only the perfect woman for this Brazilian male, a kind of sex doll to use and abuse without consequence in the way she embodies a cheap prostitute and the impossibility for reproduction, that is, for a potential irreplaceable tracing of the act. But she is also a figure of queerness, of that which exceeds heteronormative desire, which is interpolated or deployed as Brazilians are forced to grapple with the limits of heterosexuality in its current bout with prosperity and the obligations for social progressiveness that it seems to beget. Brazilian television shows and social media have embraced the male-to-female transsexual as the figure to manage the space recently acknowledged in public discourse as legitimately possible for that which isn't heterosexual. While attempts to introduce gay men and lesbian characters in soap operas in the 90s and early 2000s have always ended up in the networks, having to either kill them off or promise a primetime kiss, gay kiss that is always pulled with excuses that the country just isn't ready for it. The male-to-female transsexual has occupied a much more prominent space of sexual concession in Brazilian culture. Roberta Close, for example, a transsexual model, posed nude for Brazilian Playboy in 1984, before even getting bottom surgery. Although the magazine never showed her genitalia, she was billed as Brazil's greatest enigma. Other transsexuals have appeared in soap operas and as judges in television shows, for example. This transsexual, of which we speak, seems to be admired or tolerated, or the sexual excitement it provokes gets managed, for at least being straightforward, if you will, about its womanness, for not hiding behind a male-like body. If the transsexual has been granted space to appear as embodiment of that which is not heterosexual in the media for a while, the figure of the viado or faggot is interpolated as part of the daily strategies for managing and redefining what a heterosexual male looks like. While the viado is the go-to word or category to map onto the other, he's mostly only allowed to materialize as a cross-dresser or a transsexual, as if to manage anxieties about not only immediately being able to tell whose queerness is actually uncontainable, making visible through a more womanly body, but also reinforcing the idea that a faggot today is a transsexual tomorrow. This very homosexual as transsexual, who's functioned so diligently as the glue that holds the fragile pieces of heterosexuality together when Brazil's progress was mere regurgitation of delicious impossibilities, is to come out as the star of Brazil's zeitgeist of good luck and presumably progressive politics. And like all stars, the Brazilian homosexual will be adulated, humiliated, misunderstood, scrutinized, made into both diva and clown, a victim of rumor, libel, vicious gossip, really good ratings, and racism, classism. the homosexual as transsexual is always poor. We know that moral panic has a tendency to escalate around sexual and social deviancy in moments of crisis. The supposed sexual threat coming from someone else has been mapped onto Jewish men, black men, gay men, and sex psychopaths, depending on where in history we look. As Joseph Fischel reminds us, the construction of the perversion of the other and its prompt demonization have served as a kind of joker card to achieve a panoply of projects, from regulating the sexuality of newly urbanized white girls to re-sanctifying the heterosexual nuclear family, from stifling the sexuality of children to cutting welfare. But could the opposite be true? Could moral panic struggle to live in times of socioeconomic prosperity? Which bodies will we elect, if not the homosexuals, as bearer for our projected perversions and failures in times of our emergence? Can the homosexual survive its simultaneous public stoning and compassion-filled coup d'etat of tolerance performed by the neoliberal state? And how to make sense of the everyday? A Brazilian everyday is so predicated on the denigration of anything queer, when suddenly, like an apparition, the homosexual materializes itself not just as transsexual, but as human, a lot and everywhere, and we start to speak like him. This homosexual has its very own vocabulary, and it dictates slangs which go viral. It's suddenly not okay to stone him in the public square, but to invite him in the living room and probe him, even hear him. And I'm gonna, so what happens is that with videos like the one I showed in the beginning, general culture appropriates this kind of campy language, and you start seeing these lines being used in everyday life and as soap opera dialogue and so on and so forth. And some of these are really untranslatable. I'm gonna, I don't have time for a lot more, so of course the figures of transphobia have also been prominent, including this Congressman, Jair Bolsonaro, who has been just as present on TV shows as the transsexuals themselves, sometimes interacting with them like a circus arena on the shows. And so I'm going to end it with this really short clip. This is Luisa Madilaki from the first video. She's been invited to go to this popular TV show, and she's surrounded by other transsexuals, some homophobic journalists, and the Congress, the transphobic Congress himself. And this is where she says the line that gives title to my paper in the very end.
Luciana, sabe qual é o grande problema? É que as pessoas, elas aceitam a Deus, mas não seguem a palavra de Deus.
Nossa, elas aceitaram Deus. O que faz?
Deixa eu te falar uma coisa, amor. Quando eu me descobri homossexual, a primeira coisa que eu procurei foi uma psicóloga, porque eu já sempre sabia que gostava de queimar moça, mas eu queria entender.
Como é que é o negócio?
Aí eu queria entender. A primeira coisa que eu fiz, eu procurei uma psicóloga, porque eu achei que eu estivesse ficando louca.
Ela não falou da outra.
Depois eu procurei a igreja. Fiquei na igreja por um ano, até o dia que eu chupei o pastor e nunca mais voltei. Você era...
Calma.
Você era todos iguais, amor. São todos iguais. Não muda. Olha, os homens na frente da câmera, na frente da mulher, é uma coisa. Quando vira as costas, meu amor, é aquilo que eu falei. Quando não dá a chupa.
Que isso?